Hey there, this is Natalie, and I'm a bit later than usual with ReZero Arc 7 Chapter 10, where I was unfortunately busy with something else when it came out, so apologies for that. In any case, here is the summary of Arc 7 Chapter 10, which is called The People of Sudrak, and I'm going to get straight into it now. But as always, please consider subscribing if you haven't already to keep up with all of my coverage of the ReZero web novel and anime, as well as other ReZero content like theories and side story coverage. Chapter 10, like Chapter 9, starts without a flashback, so it does seem like we've moved on from that format for the current phase of Arc 7. The first thing we learn is that the other man in the cage next to Subaru is indeed the masked man he met at the start of the arc, who Subaru recognises by his voice and attitude, as his face is still covered. They're both in what seems like a hastily made wooden cage, and from his position, Subaru can see the village. It reminds him in some ways of the sanctuary, where it's hidden in the forest, but it's far more primitive in its buildings and design. He notices his wounds have been tended to in a very basic manner, which the masked man confirms, and he assumes that they treated him just enough to stop him from dying, rather than being concerned with helping him to heal quickly. He's in a lot of pain all over, but the worst of it is from the stab wound that Todd gave him on his shoulder. The masked man tells him that he's been unconscious for about 2 hours. The masked man is cheerful, and Subaru finds himself telling him his worries about Rem, who's still at the Imperial camp. He's worried that they might torture her. He thinks about how, when the demon beast attacked, Jamal and the other soldiers prioritised killing it, but Todd didn't. He prioritised Subaru. He wonders if Todd had somehow suspected that Subaru had summoned the demon beast. With him talking about Rem, the masked man says that Rem must be the woman he was looking for when he met him before. Subaru tells him that after he found her, he was captured, and he made a play to escape but couldn't bring Rem with him. The masked man asks if things are that desperate, given it's more normal for people just to get used to being prisoners of war. Subaru's about to argue, but he notices a pair of green eyes looking into his cage. It's a little girl of about 10 years old, with brown skin and hair that's black with pink tips. She says she's one of the people of Sudrak, and she's curious about them, and asks the masked man to take off his mask so she can see him better. Subaru recognises her though. This is the same girl who killed him with a poisoned arrow when the forest burned down in the last loop. The masked man sits calmly behind him and says something ominous sounding about how there's no need to scream. Subaru sees torches heading their way, and now there are a group of people from the village coming, led by a tall woman with her black hair dyed red and white paint on her face and body. She has green eyes, the same as the little girl, and the girl is now hiding behind her. There are about 10 people, all of them women, and all dressed in a similar tribal style with body paint and dyed hair. Subaru gets a feeling of pressure from these people, thinking that unlike the Imperial soldiers, they give the impression of a group of beautiful, instinctively commanded beasts. The woman speaks now, asking them who they are. Now Tape remarks on how "who are you" is a question you hear a lot in stories, but not one that most people get asked a lot in their normal lives. Subaru had not been asked his identity many times in the old world, but he remembers the first time he'd been asked it here, because it had been the first time he'd spoken to Rem. But he shakes aside those memories, and instead wonders why they're lumping him together with the masked man, who he barely knows. But the man says to relax, because it was him who had said that they know each other. Subaru asks him why, when they hardly do, and he says in a tone that Subaru finds kind of insane, that they can recognise each other to look at, so what more is there to qualify knowing someone? Subaru wonders how many people there are in this world who can speak like that, in a way that uses that kind of logic to deal with Subaru and other people. The woman impatiently asks them what they're talking about to each other, and commands him to answer the question, so he says he's Natsuki Subaru, a pitiful and miserable, tattered, lost child. The masked man says his name is Abel, and Subaru continues, saying that yes, he's Abel, a disgusting man who hides his face with a mask, but who is also someone who would give a knife to someone who's lost. He asks the woman for her name now. She says her name is Mizelda, and Subaru thinks that the most fitting word for her from his world would be Amazoness. He suddenly says that it's a surprising fact that the masked man's name turned out to be Abel, but Subaru leaves that matter aside for now, addressing the people of Sudrak, who he thinks don't seem to want to interrogate or kill him. He tells them that the Imperial Army are building a base outside of this forest, and they have a girl who's important to him there, so he needs to be released so that he can rescue her. He tells them that the soldiers are aiming for the people of Sudrak, and that he's willing to fight them if he has to, but he trails off after saying that there are a lot of soldiers, and Mizelda finishes the thought herself, asking if he means they would lose. Subaru thinks he may have chosen the wrong way to put that, feeling like he's hurt their pride, but Mizelda goes on to say that she knows Valakia soldiers are coming, but that there is an old promise between them, and that it won't be a fight. Subaru says he doesn't know about any promise, but they seem to really care about finding them. Again, he seems to have chosen the wrong way to say things, because like pride in fighting, they also seem to value old promises. Mizelda says that the Valakian army trains outside the forest regularly. Now Subaru's getting the idea that the Imperial Army uses this area to perform military exercises, and that the people of Sudrak have become accustomed to this, but that the army is using the fact that they're used to it as a way to attack them without them getting suspicious. He wonders why the Imperial Army is going to all of this effort to get these people. He can see from their appearance that they're probably a powerful tribe, but they don't seem to want to leave the forest or create any problems, just to live as they always had done. Still, Mizelda announces that neither Natsuki Subaru or Abel seem to have any useful truths to tell them, and she seems to have decided the conversation is over. They all turn their backs to leave, and Subaru begs them to listen, saying that everyone is in danger and that the promise has been broken. Everyone ignores him though, with only the little girl who was curious about them even looking back as they leave. Subaru is extremely frustrated now. Nobody will listen to him, and with his injured shoulder and broken hand, he has no way of breaking out of even this wooden cage, which he also notices is extremely solid, wondering if it took many people to build, or if they had someone as strong as Emilia or Garfield. The masked man, who I'm going to call Abel for now, even though I get the feeling that could be a false name, tells Subaru not to underestimate the people of Sudrak. He says the tribe are descendants of the war gods and have lived in the forest for hundreds of years. He says that only girls are ever born in this tribe, and so it consists entirely of women, and the only thing they need men for is reproduction, so there are stories of men being kidnapped. Subaru now realises that they're both men, but Abel laughs at him and says not to worry, because the tribe choose whose offspring they want, and they wouldn't want their seed because they think they're liars and conspirators. Subaru thinks about why they didn't believe him. He knows now that it was because of the impatient way he'd spoken, without understanding their pride or situation. It had just sounded like a desperate rant. Still, he tells Abel that it wasn't a lie, and that the Imperial Army are after the people of Sudrak, but he also tells them about the fire. He thinks that now they've confirmed the existence of the demon beasts, they will almost certainly burn the forest down again if they make it back to the Imperial camp alive. He feels unpleasant thinking that leading the demon beast there and hoping it would kill them is indirect murder, but he also thinks that with 20 trained men, including the aggressive Jamal, even if they're inexperienced in fighting witch beasts, it's unreasonable to expect that a single snake could have wiped them all out. He can only see the possibility that they will return to the base, report that they encountered the snake, and that Subaru, who they thought was with the people of Sudrak, had betrayed them. With that information, it seems like there's no other likely decision they would make than to burn down the forest again. Now Subaru thinks about what must have happened to Abel in the other loop, that he had probably been captured just the same and been burned along with the forest, that the people of Sudrak would not have prioritised helping a prisoner to escape. He thinks that he was responsible for killing them all, the people of Sudrak and Abel. He stands up, realising he has to do something because he doesn't want to die, or for all of these people and Rem to die. Abel asks him why he would go so far for a woman, and he says something about how important Rem is to him, though I can't really get from the machine translation exactly what it is. I think it relates to her pushing him to go on when he needed it, because it's something about words. We can get the idea though, because we know their history. Still, Subaru wonders about how Abel is even here. He thinks back to how he was when he first met him, sneaking around and willing to give away a valuable knife to help a stranger. He thinks he must have had some purpose to what he was doing. Abel says he'd been waiting for his opportunity, waiting for the board to be set up in the right way before making a move. Subaru asks him if he believes him about the army and the fire, because the people of Sudrak don't. Abel says that the people of Sudrak don't believe him because he put it badly. He defiled their pride and disregarded their long-held promises, and it was a failure of a negotiation that should be forgotten. This is exactly the same evaluation Subaru himself had given it after Mazelda and the others left, but he's surprised to hear Abel giving such a blunt appraisal. But Abel says that he is not the people of Sudrak, and doesn't have their pride and history and other debris clouding his judgment. All he needs is the facts Subaru brought, and he thinks he's telling the truth. Subaru says, "What if I'm lying?" And Abel responds, "Let's decide. Would you pay with your life?" Subaru feels the weight of these words and knows he's saying that if they make a mistake here, Subaru will end up dying. He's serious, and Subaru knows this is a moment where genuine determination is important. Abel says, "Please answer, Natsuki Subaru. Are you willing to sacrifice everything for what you want to save?" But Subaru thinks about that question. If the meaning is, will he sacrifice everything else for what he wants to save, then the answer is no. But he is willing to sacrifice himself. He says, "I'm the only one I can offer. That's all I can bet on." Abel seems to take this to be the truth, and Subaru suddenly gets the horrible feeling that Abel has just taken command of his life. But it seems that Abel does have a plan. He calls over the little girl who calls herself Wu. Subaru thinks about why he cares about saving the people of Sudrak so much, and realises it's because he saw the hatred on this girl's face in the previous loop, and he doesn't want her to have that face again. Subaru talks to the little girl for a moment, but she doesn't really get what he's talking about, since he's going on about the previous loop and why he wants to help her, and Abel cuts in as though he's uninterested in their conversation and wants to move things along. Abel tells Wu to go and get the chieftain, because he wants to talk to her. Then he tells Subaru that the quickest way to persuade them is if he says he wants to receive the lifeblood ceremony. So Subaru does. And that's the end of the chapter. Now, thoughts on the chapter. Having spent a bit more time with the masked man here, I'm not as convinced that he's not Vincent as I was, but I still don't think we can really assume anything about him. I definitely think it's more likely than I did before, but the matter of the vanishing thing still makes me think that he could be some other Valachian noble we haven't seen before, perhaps related to Vincent in some way, but not necessarily him. He is showing that more impressive presence that Vincent has, more than in the previous scene with him, and the fact he says his business with the forest was about waiting for an opportunity to make the right move, that does sound like something an emperor in hiding after some kind of coup might say. Plus, he does seem to be well educated in terms of how much he knows about the people of Sudrak, but I really don't think we've been given anything yet that could be taken as a reveal about his identity, and the vanishing skill still feels off to me. I just think that if Vincent could do that, where it hasn't ever been mentioned before, it would have been something he kept secret, so it seems weird that he would just show it to Subaru, who he'd just met. I suppose it's possible that he just didn't have that skill in X4, if it's something he's getting from an item, or something he learned before going on the run, if that's what's happened. So it isn't really a deal breaker. I just feel like I don't want to jump on that assumption about this character yet. Incidentally, if you have no idea who Vincent is and what everybody's talking about here, part 1 of my series on the ReZero X4 prequel novel, which is where he appears, will be out today. I actually finished making it yesterday, but like I said at the start of this video, I was kind of busy and didn't have time to make the thumbnail and get it uploaded. But I'll be doing that right after posting this one. Other than that, I think the people of Sudrak seem really interesting. I like how Tappei's gone with the Amazon warrior trope, because where he does stuff like this with common fantasy tropes, he usually has something in mind that goes kind of differently from what you'd expect. So I feel like this setup of the all-female warrior tribe descended from the war gods, who live in a primitive village in the jungle, is going to turn out to have some way more interesting aspects to it than that very cliched premise suggests. Though I was wondering whether Subaru and Marsky Boy were going to be subjected to death by snoo snoo when Subaru first heard about how they kidnap men to reproduce. So that's chapter 10. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and once again look out for the X4 video shortly, as well as my video about the latest episode, which I'll have up after it's aired. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again very soon.